Good evening, everyone. We are back in Joshua, and today we're looking at Joshua chapter 8. One of the things that we always have to keep in mind is that we have a couple of chapters that's going back to back from chapter 6 with regards to Jericho, chapter 7 yesterday, where we saw the failure of attacking Ai, and now in chapter 8 to carry on that the tradition of God being with the children of Israel and with Joshua, and how the pattern is that God interacts with them to give them the city. Now, this whole phrase is very important, and let's begin. I want to show you this. Chapter 8, verse 1 starts this way. It says, "The Lord said to Yehoshua, do not be afraid." Basically, it says, do not fear. Now, this is the word that God uses to say, fear God. And so in this case, God uses the same word and says, do not fear. Do not fear is not about do not fear God, but do not fear this situation with regards to I. It says, do not be dismayed. The word dismay here literally means to be terrified. And here you have an A and then a B, because both of these speaks about the same thing with an emphasis, right? It's the emphasis of don't be afraid of this situation. Don't be terrified of this situation. He says, take all the people of war with you. Arise, go up to Ai. Now understand, go up means to ascend. Where they are in Jericho is lower than Ai. And see here literally means to look, right? To look. Again, I want to remind us that the Hebrew expressions is very concrete. It is not imagine I have given you, but see I have given you, meaning they can use their eyes to look at the situation, because God is very vivid. So they can actually see what God is doing. And this is what I want to highlight to you. This phrase, I have given into your hand the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. And you shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king. Only its spoil and its cattle you shall take as booty for yourselves. Lay an ambush for the city behind it. Now, these are the words which we do not read in chapter 7. You see, in chapter 7, where we attended to this chapter yesterday, you would see that is the people themselves that decide, yeah, let's go and gun down Ai. But in each of the instances, like in the times of Moses and now in the times of Joshua, there is a pattern. The pattern is God is going to give them piece by piece. Not that they go in to take for themselves. And in each case, if they decide to do it on their own, and God never said so, they would fail. And so let me just briefly show you. I have given into your hand. This is that phrase that I want us to be very clear. The phrase of given into your hand. This is a what we call an idiom. The word give literally is to permit your taking, to give as to hand over, right? To put into your hands. Your hands, right? Now, we have that kind of a similar phrasing or expression in our culture, that I've given it to you, I've put it in your hand. And the whole meaning is you can now take the place. which means that God has given permission. God has instructed you to go and do it. So when it says, I have given it into your hands, means you will have victory over the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. Now, let me just show you. When we were in chapter 6, right? In chapter 6, you could see that God has said, and the Lord said to Joshua, see, again, you can actually look at the situation. I have given Jericho into your hand, its king, the mighty men of valor. These are the words that God have given to them into your hand, which means to tell them, this is the indication. You can look and you will do this, as I said, and you will have victory. And this is God saying to Joshua, not to all the children of Israel, but God affirming it with Joshua. And now in chapter 8, says the same thing, right? Says the same thing. See, I have given into your hand the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. Now, with this, there should be enough confidence that God is with Joshua and that God is with the people. But there is a condition. Remember, this is a strategy that God is giving them. God is giving them Ai, but God is also using each of these instances to test the people. To test the people. See, and you shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king. And in verse 2, it says, only. This word only actually means provided. And this is a condition. Provided the plunder, the spoil would be what we call a booty, right? The booty and its cattle. You shall take as booty for yourselves. The idea of booty means that it is something that you have won and you can take as a plunder. So this word here, spoil and booty, is an A and a B. And so you can take some of the goods, and the goods will be its cattle. So you can take the cattle as booty for yourselves. That's all God is saying. Now, in the case of Jericho, they can't take anything. The gold, the silver, the brass, and the iron belongs to God, and everything else they have to burn. In this case, there is an exception that the cattle they can take as their booty. And so you can see that God is slowly easing in and teaching them what they must do when in each situation they face a different enemy. And the strategy is lay an ambush for the city behind it. Now, we need to understand this word. The word behind is after. And we wouldn't know what it means, right? So in any case, every city has the face to the east. And what is after it means it's behind, right? And that would be the west. And behind it means in the west. That's how the expression goes. And now we have a strategy that God has given. So Joshua arose, all the people of war is to go up against Ai. Now Joshua chose 30,000 mighty men of valor. The word mighty men of valor means Gibor. These are strong and heroic individuals, sent them away by night. Now he arose in the morning, but in that night, he had sent them already to where? Well, this is the instruction: lie in ambush against the city. Now, this is the first time we see a concept called lie in ambush. The word lie in ambush is to lie in wait, right? Lie in wait, to wait for the right moment to pounce on. This is very much like a wild animal, to lie in wait, hiding behind the city. All right. This is the word behind. This is the west of the city. Do not go very far from the city, but all of you be ready. Now, this is the clue, the idea of be ready in verse 4. Literally means be stable, be prepared. I think would be a good word. Be prepared. And so they are there in secret. That's why they are there by night. And that's 30,000 of them. Now in verse 5, we read this. Then I and all the people. Now understand, this is with regards to I in chapter 7, Joshua didn't participate. Only the people, and the people thought, well, 3,000 men is good enough, and they were beaten and they were chased away, and 30 over men were killed. This time round, Joshua said, I and all the rest, this is the rest of the army, right, who are with me, we will approach the city, and it will come about when they come out against us as at the first. What is at the first? This word, at the first, literally means at the beginning. Right? This word here is actually Rishon. That's where we get the word Rashid. At the beginning, at the start. And what is this start? We shall look at chapter 7. Yesterday's chapter. This is the reference that we shall flee. And the word flee is to escape. Now, you remember what happened yesterday. They were chased and their backs were to the enemy. And they were actually running away from them. And so this is what they are trying to do. They are trying to reenact. But in this case, they are pretending to run away. For they will come out afterwards till we have drawn them from the city. Now, this is a very interesting word. Drawn them. The word here in verse 6, for they will come out after us. And then this word drawn out means to draw away, right? Draw away. Like you take out the sword from the sheath. That's what it means. You draw out your sword. So they are inside the city and you're drawing the people out of the city. Like you're taking the sword out of the sheath. That's what this word drawn them means. And they will say, oh, see, they are trying to escape before us at the first, as at the start. That would be yesterday, right? They are escaping. Before us means to our face, which means that the backs will be behind them and the people of Ai will be chasing them down. Therefore, we will flee before them. And that is the strategy. Joshua will pretend that they are afraid and they will run out. And it is to draw them, meaning to pull the sword out of the sheath, the people of Ai will come out of the city. And when they do that, you shall rise. Arise from the hiding. Arise from the hiding. Arise from the waiting. And this word seize the city. Seize the city literally means to dispossess. Right? Dispossess the city. And when you say dispossess the city, that is the opposite meaning where you possess the city, because you have to dispossess the people of Ai before you can possess the city of Ai. For the Lord your God will deliver it into your hand. That is the promise. And remember, the word deliver is to give. You see, in chapter 7, none of these were stated, so they were never, ever had a chance to take Ai by themselves until God allows them to do so. In this case, in chapter 8, God says, I am going to give you now, because yesterday they had dealt with the Haram. They dealt with something that is dooming Israel, because one of them, by the name of Achan, did something that God warned them not to do. And God was very angry with them. And obviously, God is not going to be standing by them and helping them. So you can see that God is teaching them this relationship with God, that they must listen to God at all times. And that it will be when you have taken the city. The word taken the city in verse 8 is to seize the city, right? To lay hold, to take hold. And once you take hold of the city, you shall burn it to the ground, just like what God has said that you shall do. See, I have commanded you. So the Lord has commanded through Joshua, and Joshua is commanding, and they have to see this is the instruction of God, as they have done it to Jericho. Verse 9. Therefore, Joshua sent them out. Now, this word sent is a very important word. It's shalak. One who is sent out will do exactly as told, as well as the fact that they will represent the one who is sending them out. This is the Hebrew concept of shalak. I send you out because there is a command and you do exactly as the command is. And so that night they went and they lie in ambush to wait, and they stayed between Bethel and Ai on the west side of Ai. Now, if you were to take a look, we would have, let's say, Jericho here, and we have the river, and then you would have Bethel, and then we have Ai. I believe Ai would be here, and Bethel will be here, and there are mountains all over, okay? And so where would they be? They would be on the back of Ai. So this part is the front of Ai. This would be the back of Ai. This is a Hebrew way of expression. The front is the east, and the back would be the west. And so where did these 30,000 people hide? They are all here, behind Ai. That's how we would understand these phrases. And then Joshua lodged that night among the people. After these people that night went to lie in ambush, then Joshua rose up early in the morning. Now, the idea of early in the morning, he did a number of things early in the morning. The idea of rise up means he woke up in the boker. The word boker and araf means boker is where it was going to turn bright. The sun is about to come out. The sky is starting to brighten up, but you don't see the sun yet, right? And then he mustered the people. This is a very interesting word. And then he mustered the people. He attended to the people. He counted the people. He appointed the people. That's this word, right? And then he went up, and he and the elders of Israel before the people, and go to Ai. These are the warriors, but the mighty men of valor, the Gibor, right? They are there in ambush already there the night before. All the people of war were with him, went up, came near Ai, and right before the city, they camped on the north side of Ai. This is Ai. And then we have in ambush, lie in ambush. This is the 30,000 people. And then Joshua brought the troops here. And so in the north side, this is where Joshua came out. So remember, this is east, this is west, then this is north. That's how we understand this whole picture. Now a valley lay between them and Ai, which means that they are sitting on the a higher range, and there is a valley between them and Ai. Now, this word valley literally means a gorge, right? A gorge. It's a narrow valley. And usually these valleys are like torrential rivers that will build up whenever they have a rain there. So there's a gap, right, between them and Ai. And he took about 5,000 men, set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai on the west side of the city. And when they had set the people, all the army that was on the north of the city and its rear guard on the west of the city, Joshua went that night into the midst of the valley. Now, all of these are happening in various ways. With the 5,000 men, the people of Ai can see, right? On the west side of the city, right behind. And then north of the city, they were all positioned. Now it happened when the king of Ai saw. So all of these can be seen, right? So the men of the city of Ai hurried, rose early, went out against Israel to do battle. Now in verse 14, this means that the battle is the war that they will fight, right? It means that they went out to fight with Israel. He, the king, and all his people, meaning this is his entire army, at an appointed place before the plain. Now, one of the things that we need to understand is this. In the ancient times of warfare, it is fought generally in the plain. And each would stand on one side, and then they would engage in the plain. That's why whenever we read the plains of Megiddo, it is so important because lots of battle were conducted. In this case, this is a plain just near Ai. But he did not know that there was an ambush against him behind the city. Joshua and all Israel pretended as if they were beaten before them, fled by the way of the wilderness. And they were running away, and this way of the wilderness would be the east. And so they were drawing them away from Ai, and all the people who were in Ai were called together to pursue them because they thought that they are going to, I guess, rout or completely destroy the Israelites. And they left to pursue Joshua and were drawn away from the city. And that was the strategy. Remember, the word drawn away is like pulling out the sword from the sheath. So the whole sword has come out of the city. There was not a man left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel. And so they left the city open and pursued Israel. And then the Lord said to Joshua, stretch out the spear that is in your hand toward Ai, and I will give it into your hand. Now, in this instance, you must realize that there is a similarity between Joshua and Moses. In Exodus chapter 17, Moses had to lift up his hand where Joshua was fighting the Amalekites. And here Joshua has to stretch out his spear in your hand toward Ai, and then God will give it into your hand. So Joshua stretched out the spear that was in his hand toward the city. Those in ambush arose out of their place, and they ran as soon as he had stretched out his hand. They entered the city, took it, set it on fire. And when the men of Ai looked behind them, they saw. So it can be seen, and smoke of the city ascended to heaven. Now notice the word heaven. In verse 20, the word heaven is Hashemayim. In the Old English word, heaven means the place where you look up. And in modern day, we call it the skies. And so when God made the Hashemayim and the Haaretz in Genesis 1, verse 1, it would be looking up to the sky and then looking down on the land. In this case, exactly the same. The smoke of the city went up to not the heaven where God is, but to the Hashemayim where the sky is. And so from afar, they could see, but they had no power to run that way or this way. And the people who had fled to the wilderness turned back on the pursuers. And this idea is to turn to chase, right? Is to turn to chase. The people who had fled to the wilderness turned back on the pursuers. Understand, in the context, the people would be Israel. The pursuers would be Ai, because the people of Ai were chasing them. Now, when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken in the city and the smoke of the city ascended, meaning they have succeeded in the plan, they turned back and struck down the men of Ai who were chasing them, right? They turned back and struck down the men of Ai. These were the pursuers. The others that came out of the city against them. So they were caught in the midst of Israel, some on this side, some on that side. And they struck them down so that they let none of them remain nor escape. But the king of Ai they took alive and brought him to Joshua. So what does this mean? See, the others came out of the city against them. And so they are in two fronts. They were sandwiched between two groups of Israelites. Some on this side and some on that side of the city. They were caught in the middle of Israel. And Israel had some on the one side and some on the other side. So this phrase here is about Israel. And they, Israel, struck them down and let none of them, remain or escape. that the king of Ai they took alive, kept him alive, and brought him to Joshua. Verse 24. And it came to pass when Israel had made an end of slaying. 24 means at the end of the killing or the end of the strike. It means the strike to kill. The strike to kill is when Cain rose and slew Abel. This is the same word. So when you rise to slay, it means that you are going to strike with the intent to kill. And so when this whole episode came to an end, to be completed, all the inhabitants of Ai in the field, in the wilderness where they pursued them, they all had fallen by the edge of the sword. The idea here of falling, and you need to understand this word fall is very visual. It is fall down. And so they were standing up when they were alive, and when they fell down by the edge of the sword, it is a very vivid picture that they had fallen down and died, right? Until they were consumed. The word consumed here means to be at an end. That's what it means. To be ended. And they were all ended. And all the Israelites returned to Ai, struck it with the edge of the sword. Now, this whole phrase is to explain this phrase. They were consumed. How were they consumed? When they all returned, right? When all the Israelites returned to Ai and struck it with the edge of the sword. So striking with the edge of the sword means all of them were consumed. That's what it means. Verse 25. So that all who fell that day, again, this is the same word. Fallen, fell. Same word. Okay? All who fell that day, both men and women, were 12,000, all the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back his hand with which he stretched out the spear until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of Ai. You can see this. Remember? He did not draw back his hand. The word draw back his hand is to return. Return his hand. So his normal course of the hand is down. In this particular case, he had raised his hand with the spear and stretched it out and pointed to Ai, and he had to remain pointing until Ai was completely destroyed. And when the mission was completed, then only he returned his hand back to its original position. So remember, this is the word shuv, like repent, back to the original position. And so what we are told is that you can keep booty of the livestock and some of the spoil of the city that Israel took as booty for themselves, according to the word of the Lord, which he had commanded Joshua. Now, this is the most important phrase. In verse 27, this word is just a very small word. This word is key. It is a preposition. And this word literally means just like. Right? The word according means just like the word of the Lord, what God had said. Right? And in the command to Joshua. So we read, this is a very particular expression. God had told Joshua, who had told Israel. And when Israel did what was told, it is Israel obeying the commands of God. That's how God dealt with the whole situation. And like I said before, this is a test, a second test, if you want to call it that way. The first one was with Jericho, and this is a second test with Ai. Did they do like what God had said as a command? So Joshua burned Ai and made it a heap forever. In verse 28, the word heap, first of all, there is a burning, and burning means nothing is kept, right? Everything would be destroyed. So when they burned Jerusalem and they burned the temple, it was all down in a heap. And so the word heap here means a mound, right? A mound. This is a tell, a mound. And this is an artificial hill. A man-made hill is called a tell, a mound. The word forever is, of course, olam, for a long, long time, right? That is what it means here. A desolation to this day. The word desolation it means a waste to this day. And to this day would be the day where they had written this down. Okay. Now, would it still be? It probably is, because of this word olam, that it would be to this day and continuing on. Verse 29. And the king of Ai, what did he do? He hanged on a tree. The word hang is tala. It is to suspend. And understand, it is to suspend by the neck in this case. And the other word is tree. It's. And this is your gallows. And it's a straight up pole, basically. And everything that is a straight up pole is a tree. And you would read a lot of these instances in the book of Esther, where Haman was hanged in a very high gallows, high tree. And so this would be made into a warning. This is made as an example of how the king of Ai is treated. Hanging on a tree is a humiliation, and it was for the day until evening. The word evening here in verse 29 is the word Erev. Erev means the opposite of boker, means it is starting to get dark, and it will get darker very soon. Now, as soon as the sun was down, Joshua commanded that they should take his corpse down from the tree, cast it at the entrance of the gate of the city of Ai, and raise over it a heap of stones, and it remains to this day. And this would be the burial of the king of Ai. Now, this is important for us to realize that there is a proper burial. They just don't leave the body hanging up there on a tree. So anyone who dies in the culture is very much to bury the person before it turns bad, right? Before, and that's the time when the sun is coming down, the body needs to be buried. And so the corpse, and this word corpse means he had died, right? He had died. Now, we go to our last segment. Our last segment is what was actually stated much earlier on. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 11, all right? Chapter 11, and in verse 29 onwards. This is what Joshua, he built an altar. Now, an altar is a place where you want to do sacrifice. It would be a memorial. It's with stones. And it is to recognize the Lord God of Israel. And this would mean Jehovah, Elohim, in Mount Ebal. Mount Ebal. Now understand, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim looks like this. We have Shechem, and then we have two hills, and we have Ebal, and we have Gerizim. Right? This is how we look like, and this would be the Jordan. This is the picture that we need to understand and bear in mind. As Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the law, in the book of the law of Moses. That book is Deuteronomy, is recorded there, right? And then there is this phrase, an altar of whole stones, which no man has wielded an iron tool. This would be the altar, right? The altar of whole stones. And this is in Exodus chapter 20, verse 25. And in this case, this is right at the end of the giving of the Ten Commandments. They offered it burnt offerings to the Lord. Understand, altar is always with regards to God. And in this case now, they are using it as an offering. A burnt offering means you slaughter the animal and then you burn it. They sacrifice peace offerings, also the same. Now, where do you learn all these things? I would suggest that you will go back and read Leviticus chapter 1 to 7 to have a better idea of peace offering and burnt offerings. And there, in the presence of the children of Israel, he wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. Then all Israel, all 12 tribes, the elders, officers, judges, stood on either side of the ark before the priests, the Levites who carried the ark, who lifted the ark of the covenant of the Lord. The stranger, understand this, the stranger is included. And you must realize that this stranger is the ger. And the ger is also circumcised, as well as he who was born among them. Half of them in front of Mount Gerizim, half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded before that they should bless the people of Israel. Now, again, I want to point out that it is important that it is in Deuteronomy that all of these are recorded, right? Deuteronomy chapter 11. So if you have a chance to go back and review this. And let us end and close our day. The people are standing in front of Gerizim and Ebal, two groups of people, that they should bless the people of Israel. And afterward, he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the cursing. Now, if you recall, the blessing and the cursing, the blessing are words that is good, that is pronouncement of good things. The cursing is also the pronouncement of bad things that will happen to them according to all that is written in the book of the law. And there was not a word of all that Moses had commanded, which Joshua did not read before the assembly of Israel, with the women, the little ones, the strangers who were living among them. Understand, this is everyone. Everyone. And so they are reviewing the words of Moses, and in particular, the blessings and the cursings. Now understand, the cursings will include no rain, right? The cursings will include no crops, no harvest, including being chased out of the land. That's the cursings. The blessings, they will get lots of harvest, lots of rain. These are, and then they will enjoy the land. And so all of these are reviewed just as Moses had instructed them. And they are not there just for a day. I believe they'll be reading this for a period of time. And they are to listen to the words of God, called the words of the Torah. The blessings, the cursings, all that is written in the book of the Torah. And I suppose this would be the first 5 books of Moses, ending with the book of Deuteronomy. There is no book of Joshua at this time. We are reading the book of Joshua as an after the fact. All right? And with this, we come to the close of chapter 8.